It's a battle of the Wildcats, but only one will leave victorious. It's another edition of Southwest Bias.
Get that stuff out of here! It's Southwest Bias!
Right here in Studio K, presented by Circle K. Join Inner Circle for free by downloading the Circle K app today. Terms and conditions apply at participating locations. Visit CircleK.com for details. Now, I know that you guys are getting this in your Wildcats audio feed, and of course, you're right here on PHNX Sports. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and of course, rate it 5 stars. I will get a disclaimer out of the way. This is the PHNX Sun Devils crew live on Southwest Bias right now. I've got myself, Erik Ruby, and joining me is Anthony Totri. I did try to get a Wildcats voice on this, but they all ran with their tails tucked between their legs.
That's what they do, man.
Because they got a big game tonight. Massive game. Biggest game of the week in college football. It's Arizona on the road in Manhattan, Kansas, taking on Kansas State. It's a battle of top 20 teams, but this Arizona Wildcats team, Totri, through 2 weeks against New Mexico and NAU, I think it's safe to say that some Wildcats fans are a little worried about just how good they might be.
I think they should all be worried about how good they might be, right? Going into the season, we talked a lot about Tetairoa McMillan and Noah Fifita and Tacario Davis, and rightfully so, right? All of those guys are some top-tier players at their position in the grand scheme of college football, not just the Big 12, but Brent Brennan isn't a coach, at least from what we've seen in his previous regime or in his previous tenure at San Jose State, isn't necessarily a coach that's going to go out there and churn out 9-10 win seasons every single year. And the defense, right? That defense that Arizona has right now, they are putting duct tape all over it. Simply because it's leaking, right? You look at that first game against New Mexico, they had them on the ropes. Then you fast forward to week 2, NAU was leading the Wildcats at halftime, and now you've got a real test. It is between two conference opponents. However, it's a non-con matchup, so it's not going to count toward their conference schedule and their conference record, which is going to be huge, I think, for whoever loses this game. But at the end of the day, you're going to get a real test with Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards in Kansas State. If I'm an Arizona fan, this is the time where it's like, okay, our season can go one of two ways. Mm-hmm. Either we win in the first 2 weeks, we were just kind of getting some chemistry, just starting to build, or you lose to this team and you're like, okay, there's serious issues. We barely beat some pretty average teams, below average teams. And then when we face somebody in our conference who's a top 20 team, we can't hold up. Well,
that's the thing. And obviously it's really hard through 2 weeks. You play New Mexico, you play NAU, and there are a lot of things that this Wildcats team has to clean up. Yeah, I mean, if you talk to just people in this office, whether it's Saul or it's Damon, I haven't had a long conversation with the great one and only Mike Luke. Yes, we know this yet about this, but it does feel like there have been some expectations shifting from how they were talking before the season. And we'll be nice and we won't mention just how great Arizona State's doing and how those expectations have shifted. But it is kind of a weird balance and comparison to see through 2 weeks with this team where so many fans were saying they just weren't worried. Right? They were not worried about the turnover from Jed Fish to Brent Brennan because he kept Noah Fifita, because he kept Tetairoa McMillan. They weren't worried about the defense because they have a Tacario Davis or a Jacob Manu as well, these big standouts. And now you're going into a game against Kansas State, and listen, you can lose this game and it could still be okay, right? You could in theory. You can lose this game and you can walk away saying, you know what, that's still a team that I expect to win, right? But if they go out against Kansas State and they lay a dud, you're having some serious conversations about what your expectations will look like for the rest of the season. Because 2-1 is not bad, but 2-1 in that way is awful, especially for a team where fans were touting college football playoffs, touting Big 12 championship
10-win season.
Right, 10-win season. And that was the expectation of what was going on. Now, if they go out and they compete in a close game, right? Let's say they lose by 7 points or they lose by a field goal. It's on the road against a good team. I think then you can take a step back and be like, you know what? Like, I think the first 2 weeks, you're just getting your feet under you. You go to Manhattan, you compete with a good team, you lose. You can still talk yourself into it. But still, at the end of the day, with your first real opponent in Brent Brennan's tenure, you lose, right? And obviously, if you have a win, it would be a little bit different, especially depending on how they play. But this feels like not a tipping point because it's only week 3, Totri, but it does feel like a very strangely important game as far as what tone is going to be set for this team for the rest of the season.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of things to take out of what you're saying there, right? Like, it really does depend how this goes, but I don't think there's talking yourself into, oh, we're 2-1 and we just lost to a good team. No, you're a top 25 team with the best wide receiver in college football. You need to go out there and you need to play like a top 25 team. There's no talking yourself into, oh, we're 2-1, but Kansas State's good. No, you're supposed to be good too. Right? You got a returning quarterback.
To be on their level.
Like you're absolutely supposed to be. And people will tell you that they're better than them. So if you are, go prove it. And you can't at this point, right? You can't take away and just be like, oh, it's week 3. No, after this week, the college football regular season is 25% of the way through, right? We'll be a quarter of the way through the season. You can't at that point say, oh, well, we're still getting our feet under us, right? Every football coach will tell you that the biggest improvement that you see in a season is from week 1 to week 2. You could make the argument that the Arizona Wildcats got worse from week 1 to week 2. Their opponent got worse. NAU is a worse opponent than New Mexico, and the Wildcats looked like a worse team offensively and defensively. Again, trailing the Lumberjacks is not a good way to start your season, and now you are on the road against a really, really good team with a firework quarterback, a really talented running back in Dylan Edwards. And if you are not able to hang with this team offensively, then there is an issue. Defensively, I expect Kansas State to really have their way, and that's kind of fine, right? Nobody going into the season was like, oh, this Wildcat defense is what's going to save them. No, nobody was saying
what's going to save them, but they certainly were high on it.
They were absolutely high.
You're talking about a potential first-round pick in Tetairoa Davis.
He's a first-round pick, not even potential.
But you know what I mean. Like, you do have some of the best players in the country at their specific positions on this defense.
But I don't think there's enough of it to be like, at least from what I saw, there wasn't the fan base saying this is a top 3 defense in the conference.
Oh, I'm sure somebody said it. I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, right? And I think another big part of this, and we just saw this with ASU pulling out a win on a Thursday night, is that there's nowhere to hide, right? You're not playing in the middle of a bunch of other games on a Saturday, and if you have a bad performance, it kind of gets swept under the rug. No, you're headlining a Friday night. This is, again, probably the biggest game of the week. It might be the biggest game of the entire college football season so far as like Big 12, 2 top 25 teams, 2 top 20 teams, and going in and saying, hey, like, this is going to determine a lot for both of these programs, right? It's certainly the biggest game in the Big 12 so far, bar none.
I'll give you that.
And that is definitely like an important note here, is that if you go out on this stage, we saw how much it meant for ASU to go out on, national television. You're really the only game on besides Bills Dolphins, which was a dud. And you play a hard-fought game and you pull out a win. Right? If Arizona comes out here and lays an absolute dud, people are going to make opinions about this school and about this program because through 3 weeks, you would not have an impressive track record.
No, you lose, your frauds. That's what everybody is going to be talking about. If you lose this game, I don't care how it goes, right? Fan base can talk themselves into whatever they want if you lose this game. But this is your first real test. First real test for Brent Brennan. First real test for this Arizona Wildcat team in the Big 12. If you lose, you look like frauds because of not just this performance, but because of the way that you played in week 1, week 2, not handedly dominating those 2 lesser programs in a way that you should have, the way you were expected to. This game has ultimately put your season on a tipping point of, okay, we were figuring it out, or we're frauds.
And even if you are still figuring out, if you think, oh, well, it's a new coach, it's a new system, and you need to give it time, like that excuse to me holds a lot less weight when you do have the returners that you had from last season, right? Like, you're not starting with a whole brand new base, a whole brand new team. And listen, I feel like Wildcats fans, in essence, have started digging their own graves with how they were talking about this team. And I can't necessarily say, like, I blame them for being, fans and for having high expectations, but it got to the point where they were speaking with near certainty.
Yeah.
Right? Where it was almost, it was a matter of fact. And I know me and you have experienced this because obviously, we are on the ASU show and Wildcats fans like to come in and talk, and we have Wildcats fans in this office, and they came up to us and we were called delusional for even doubting, right? For even doubting. So we're going to talk about how this could impact the entirety of the Big 12, how it impacts Arizona's season. And you know what? We'll give some love. We'll talk about what if Arizona wins, right? What if Arizona goes out and dominates? And we're going to do that on the other side of this, because first I want to tell you about our friends over at Empire Today. I've been using this analogy a lot right here on Southwest Bias. If you're a Wildcats fan, if I told you could see how this game was going to go before it happened, so you could decide whether or not you watch or not, I think that would be a pretty enticing offer to them. And Empire Today can do that, but not in that way. They could do that with your flooring. The last thing you want to do is make an investment in something as big as your flooring and get it wrong. And you're not going to get it wrong because of Empire. You're not going to get it wrong because they have easy, quick, convenient service that's done well and properly. They're not going to guarantee you the lowest price, because when it comes to something as big as flooring, if you're promising the lowest price, you're promising the lowest quality. And they just won't do that. But what they will do is give you a virtual floor visualizer where you can hold your phone up and you can see exactly how these floors will look in your house or whatever you're trying to renovate. We have Empire Today flooring in our office. It's been holding up fantastic despite the countless times we've dragged chairs across. We've done some hypothetical damage to these floors, and they've held up quite well. And on top of all of that, not only do they have fantastic customer service, they are offering you a discount just for listening to this show. You can schedule a free in-home estimate today, and all listeners can receive a $350 off discount when they use the promo code PHNX. Some restrictions do apply. See empiretoday.com/PHNX for details. Now let's talk about the Kansas State side of things. Let's say they go into this game tonight, Friday night, against another ranked Big 12 opponent, and they dominate. Are you looking at the best team in the Big 12?
I don't think you're looking at the best team in the Big 12, but I think you're talking about a top 3 team in the Big 12, which says a lot because this conference is wide open. I think a lot in the grand scheme of the Big 12 depends on the health of Cam Rising at Utah. If he misses significant time, if he misses a couple weeks, then yeah, I think there's an argument to be made for Kansas State. I think if they win this game, then I think they will have at this point had the biggest Big 12 win through 3 weeks of the season. But I think it's still too early to tell who the best team in this conference is, right? There's obviously Oklahoma State, there's Utah. I know Kansas has had a little bit of a down start to the year, but I still think they've got a pretty talented roster. Kansas State, overall, I think you win this game, you could definitely surge in the AP Top 25 and definitely get a boost, I think, nationally when people talk about you. But I think it's still a little bit too early for me to put anybody above Utah as the best team in this conference, regardless of how this game goes. Now,
if they go out and dominate, I think the story.
I was just about to say that.
But the story is going to be a little bit more. If they go out and dominate, the story is going to be more about how Arizona has been disappointing, I feel like, because
maybe locally,
because you're going to point at those first 2 games. I think even nationally, it's not like this is some undercover franchise that people aren't talking about, right? Like this is not like some college football miracle that people have not been put on notice. I mean, there are people who are very high on Arizona nationally going into this season, and I think if they come out and get dominated by Kansas State, there are going to be questions that are asked, right? And I do see, like, if it's a competitive game and Kansas State pulls out at the end, that's a different question. But if start to finish, Arizona shows that they don't even have a chance and they're not even on the same level, I think Kansas State will get credit. But I do think a lot of it's going to be like, hey, man, through 3 weeks, this is what we've seen out of Arizona, and it's not good.
I hear you. I just think national media is far more in love with talking about the winner than the loser of this game. So I think if Kansas State absolutely dominates from start to finish, I think, yes, there will be mention of Arizona. I think locally, it'll be time to sound the alarms on the Wildcats. But I think if Kansas State goes out there and dog walks the kiddies from Tucson, then I think it's going to be all a love fest for Kansas State. But that's just what I think.
All right, let's put our big boy pants on here. Let's talk about what.
Can I go change real quick?
No.
Okay.
Let's talk about what happens if Arizona wins, and let's talk about what happens if Arizona dominates. Let's say Arizona goes on the road against in Manhattan, Kansas, and they absolutely take care of business against this Kansas State team. They prove that they are what their fans were talking about. Is it like room for concern is over as far as Brent Brennan goes, or is that just one-off win?
Yeah, I think then you exhale. Then you exhale because, again, you will have been able to prove at that point that you were able to bounce back after a rough start to the season. You still got some of the best players in college football at their respective positions. You went on the road. You beat a top 25 team. And if you're talking about beating this team handedly, then I think you're absolutely fine. You were able to tame one of the top 10 quarterbacks in college football And I think you're going to be absolutely fine. Arizona will skyrocket in the rankings, obviously. And then again, you're talking about a team in the Wildcats that probably surges back into the conversation of a top 3 team in this conference. But that would be something that you have to do in a dominant win.
I feel like this, like I said before, this sets the tone, right? If they go out and they truly dominate, they truly take care of business against Kansas State, then not just like an exhale from fans, I think they start talking again.
I don't know. I think they've learned their lesson.
I don't think they have, because they're still 2-0. They're still 2-0. It's not like they lost to any of these teams. They didn't lose to New Mexico. They didn't lose to NAU, right? I mean, you didn't have great performances.
No, but you shouldn't be close. They trailed both of these teams.
I know. Trust me. I understand
NAU, Northern Arizona University. They trailed them at halftime. I think Arizona had 6 points at halftime. I think. Disgusting.
I don't know. I think they had a little bit more than 6.
I don't think they did. I think it was 10-6 at halftime, dude. Like, that is not a good performance in a half of football.
No, it's not.
Especially now with a week of prep against NAU. Yeah. Nobody goes to NAU, dog.
Not for football.
You were trailing that team. So,
definitely not for football.
Yeah, I think their fan base is still going to be like, right now when I have this conversation with Damon and he's got a literal panic button in his office, right?
Oh,
after week one, this is what we're doing. We're side-eyeing it, right? We're side-eyeing it. Not really. T-Mac dominated. You're like, it is what it is. It's there if I need it. Week 2, that first half, you're hovering over the box that has the panic button in it, right?
Yeah.
At a certain point, you're noticing it, right? It's something you're continuing to glance at. You lose this game badly, that panic button is on the table. You're not pressing it. Your hand's not over it yet. But at that point, you are staring at that panic button and you're like, okay, we're a loss away from having to smack that button.
What's their schedule after this?
I don't know off the top of my head.
So they take on Utah.
After this, on the road.
Yeah. Utah on the road. And I think they have a bye week after this.
You need this.
So they play Kansas State. They're off this next upcoming weekend. Then they're back taking on now ranked number 12 Utah. Might be higher. Might be a little lower, depending on what's going on.
Utah should beat Utah State this week. So
yeah, but it depends on especially how Cam Rising.
Yeah, I don't even know if Cam Rising's playing this weekend.
Yeah, I would probably say not. And then they take on Texas Tech after that. I mean, you're looking at 2 massive tests. And if you fail both of those tests rather convincingly, and then you go into Texas Tech, BYU, Colorado, and you lose any of those 3 games,
yeah,
Are we talking Brent Brennan hot seat?
No, I don't think we're talking Brent Brennan hot seat. But regardless what this does, and we talked about it a lot over the offseason with Fifita and T-Mac and Davis and some of these guys returning, right? Is if you find a way to only win 7 games, the Brent Brennan special, right? 7-5. If you find a way to only get 7 games after a dominant 10-win season last year, after a big bowl game win, returning the best wide receiver in college football, returning a really, really talented quarterback and defensive players, regardless, if you're able to only go 7-5, that from a recruiting standpoint, that from the future of what this program is, it's on fire. Because you have some of the best players in the nation, at, again, their respective positions. Mm-hmm. First year in a new conference, new head coach. If you can't get it done with these guys, then will you ever be able to be getting it done? Because Arizona will never, if they're not able to do anything this year with T-Mac, Arizona will never have the number 1 wide receiver in college football ever again.
No, he is making a case for the greatest player to ever put on that uniform.
He's making a case.
I think he's definitely up there.
I need to see what his numbers look like at the end of the season.
I get it, but to even be having that conversation, it's a big deal.
It is.
Noah Fifita was touted as a top 10 quarterback in this country.
T-Mac's gone after this year regardless. He's going to be a first-round pick. Mm-hmm. The eyes will then turn to Noah Fifita. If this is a bad season for the Wildcats, watch the portal.
Mm-hmm. Again, I never advocate for somebody losing their job, and I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen, but if you have the talent that you have at this school this season and you only walk away with 6 or 7 wins, going into next season, that pressure is going to be very, very high
absolutely.
On Brent Brennan. And you're not going to have nearly as talented as a roster, presumably, unless they pull off some sort of miracle. But
you won't. There's just no way you can.
You won't have this talented of a roster this next season. And if you pull out 5 wins, 4 wins, and you start going down, you are going to start talking about Brent Brennan hot seat. And if this season really gets off the rails and we're not talking 7 or 6 wins,
there's a world though where they win tonight and then all
Sure.
that conversation's behind us and they could go on a phenomenal run.
Yeah,
That's very true.
If they beat Kansas State and Utah, it's a completely different conversation.
Oh yeah, then you're talking about the best team in the conference.
Yeah, you are talking about the best team in the conference, and that's why I really feel like this is a tipping point.
Yeah,
for U of A. So early in the season, technically a non-con game, but this really is. It's not it, but it's a tone setter. If you lose to Kansas State, you then have a week to dwell on that, and then you take on Utah.
I don't even think it's a tone setter. I think they missed that opportunity. They missed the opportunity to set the tone at the start of the season. Look how, and again, we cover Arizona State, but you try to keep some bias out of it. How did Arizona State set the tone with a 41-point win over a team that won 9 games last year?
And then their first SEC victory ever. And then they go on the road against a Texas State team on a short week.
That's setting the tone.
And they win. And
not
they win.
squeaking out a 12-point win over an NAU. That's not a tone setter.
Yeah. And not, being tied in a brutal battle with New Mexico.
Wildcat fans are going to eat us in the comments.
Yeah, and you know what? This is going to be in their audio as well. Listen, you can let us know that we're stupid. You can do it. Come on, 1:30, PHNX Sun Devils every single day, including post-game shows as well, right here on PHNX Sports. You can hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you are listening this far through the audio feed on the Wildcats podcast, 1, you're a brave, brave soul. 2,
you're a ball knower.
Make sure you give it a 5-star review because the great Mike Luke is usually in this feed every single day for PHNX Wildcats. Of course, you can give Anthony Totri a follow at Anthony_Totri. You can follow myself at Erik Ruby. That is Erik with the K. We've got Kyle Cooper, K Coop Sports with the @ in front of it on Twitter as
Captain
well.
Redbeard.
Captain Redbeard making all the magic happen behind the Mac. Let us know your score predictions down below. Of course, we will have a Wildcats post game for you on this channel in this audio feed. Win or lose, Mike, Luke, and company will be there for you. So make sure you check him out. We do love Mike. We don't love U of A, but we do love
Saul's
Mike.
Saul's in Manhattan, Kansas.
Saul's out in Manhattan, Kansas, his old stomping grounds, and ready to take on this game. No better place for you to get your coverage about your Wildcats than right here. And if you're a Sun Devil fan who just stumbled upon this, of course, no better place to get your coverage than PHNX Sun Devils. Become a diehard, join our Discord. We've got all the shows for all the sports you could imagine here locally, so come join the movement. And we will be back next week with another edition of Southwest Bias.
Get that stuff out of here! It's Southwest Bias!
We all silly like the mayor.